It was built in 1919 and stood for about 25 years in my shed. We also keep the motorcycles absolutely in their original condition because we are completely against engine treatments, whether for people or motorcycles. Up there sit both of them, Harley and Davidson. Applause.
Friends, today it's about one of the oldest and also most famous motorcycle brands in the world, Harley Davidson. In Milwaukee in 1903, the two friends Bill Harley and Arthur Davidson built the house next to their house shed, expanded into a small workshop, and just a year later, in the year 1904, the first bicycle-like motorcycle was created there. The premises quickly became too small, and so the shed was enlarged. A few years later, it grew into the largest motorcycle factory in the world. And look at how lovingly the motorcycles were prepared for shipping at that time. Silent grey fellows, they painted it on the crate, so supposedly a quiet grey fellow was inside. During this time, most Harleys were delivered in grey. Later, from 1918 onwards, olive green was to become the standard colour at Harley Davidson. Yes, and today we want to show you our 1000 Harley Davidson sidecar from 1919. So the machine is already 104 years old. It was used as a taxi on Berlin's Kudamm from 1919 to 1921. Now the history and the sound of the bike are here for you. Enjoy.
Here is the proof again. That one could build motorcycles 100 years ago. That lasts 100 years. And that's what drives us mentally up the wall. Because such nonsense as we are messing around here is actually not possible. It was built in 1919. Stood for about 25 years with me in the basement, in the dry basement, because we didn't have time to ride. We restored all the buildings here because we had to refurbish the entire building complex here. Worked for 28 years. And not just on weekends, but almost daily. First, we established good contacts with 3 demolition companies. Did we drive to the breakfast break demolition site with 3 crates of beer, 4 kilos of peanuts. We convinced the foreman that every month, once we get it for free. When we receive a call if beams, stones, roof trusses, windows, gates, doors need to be dismantled. Did we haul the stuff here? From a 200-kilometer radius and rebuilt it here. And with that, we were fully occupied. Then, before 2019, we were finished with the building section here. And then she turned 100, birthday. And I said to my son, well, you're not celebrating the birthday in the basement. Come down here now. And then my son said, oh, Dad, let's just open the carburetor right away so we can take a look. We don't need to open the carburetor. We don't need to look either. An old mechanic once told me, don't look into everything. If it runs, it doesn't run well. Most people need to regenerate everything, even though it was running. And if it rattles a bit, I rattle too. Look at that. We also keep the motorcycles absolutely in their original condition because we are completely against Botox treatments, neither for people nor for motorcycles. They need to run, that's basically it. And this is such a model specimen with a curious history. Built in 1919, I have to say, when we started riding motorcycles in 1960, the builders or manufacturers assumed that someone would sit on it who had their ears and mind with them. And unfortunately, that's no longer the case. And then the throttle is turned until the carburetor and the spark plug hang, and then the cap gets stuck. It's not built for that. And that's how it was with 4 motorcycles. India writes in the manual you can leave it at the top. The rider has a week to get this motorcycle started easily without issues. To get familiar with it, to get the heart, the feel for it, to develop the sense that now it's running properly. My friend has an auto repair shop in the 4th generation, and he says, I can still remember my grandpa did the final inspection report. And it consisted of when a 6-cylinder drove out of the workshop, then grandpa came out of the office, either placed a coin on the cylinder head, upright, and it wasn't allowed to fall over, then the engine was running smoothly. And he didn't even have a connection for the laptop anywhere. And the cards were dealt. You saw that earlier with the Schalke fan here. I still get goosebumps when I hear that for you. Yes. And this motorcycle, as I said, belonged to an officer who made a fanfare. Then he had gambling debts and lost the vehicle in 1921, along with his driver, gambling it away in the casino. Then the driver disappeared. And the motorcycle later as well. After about 18 years, the motorcycle resurfaced in a workshop near Berlin in Zossen. Back then, there weren't so many motorcycles, and everyone knew within 100 kilometers radius who had a motorcycle, who had such a motorcycle, and who had such a motorcycle. It was the same here after the war. The Russians passed through here and took what they could get. And then they usually drove as far as the fuel would take them. And then the thing would end up in a ditch. And then someone in the neighboring village knew that's also just his motorcycle. Let me know when you go there and you get wood or whatever, then let me know that's not your motorcycle. Then he came back again. And it was the same here. By a very dumb coincidence, the grandson of the original owner got wind of it. And he brought the bike back into the family. But then he emigrated and didn't have the feeling or the heart for such a motorcycle. He just left it standing. We sold the house, and with the house, the motorcycle went into the next hands. Then it was outside with the bulky waste and just wasn't painted. And then someone rescued it, brought it back inside, because it broke his heart. Yes, and there were also 2 more stops in between. We weren't found. And that's how it is with the Wanderer too. We searched for the Wanderer in my childhood, during my apprenticeship in 1956, with this motorcycle. The chief mechanic from Landy came. When we worked as electricians on the line, overhead line, he had to disconnect the line for us. And then Ernst Hebecker arrived. And he was wearing a jacket. He went on the jacket with half-length walls. One side 2 double breakfasts, other side 2 double breakfasts. The jacket was open, and when he came down the street, it looked as if he was flying, because the jacket went, thank you very much. We had to work on the engine. And otherwise, everything was actually there. It is still the case that there is no electrical system on it. It's still with gas. And what's also curious about it is that there's not even an ignition lock on it. You have to hear. Pull the lever so that you open the valves and the compression goes away. We still know this from the 98s. When you had broken them and they became very small, then you pulled a little lever there, IT had. And when you were in gear, you released the lever, then it closed the valve. And then it went like this, and then blap, 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 blap. And that's how it is here too. So sometimes I can't even get it out. So now we can try to start. Unfortunately, it's a bit problematic and we don't want to tempt fate. You notice it yourself, it's difficult to drive here on the grounds because understandably everyone wants to take their photo. But we are also aware of our responsibility here, that we don't want to run anyone over here. And it's not okay for us to always shout too loudly, move to the side. And sometimes you'll hear it in a slightly different tone. He's a friendly person. It's already on the internet, no need to write it again. So, I'll try to start now. We open the content, press the dipper, count to 11. That's as much as you need to run through. Then You still have ignition adjustment and GE here. You still have ignition adjustment and gas here. You have to, if it doesn't jerk, but into the heels. That's a bit difficult, but I'll try anyway. And the problem for us here is also, we have Harley and Dot Indian. And Harley and Indian, of course, were already giving each other a bit of a hard time back then. And that's how it is. When you then switch from one, that's the biggest one. How unfortunate is that? It's unfortunate because it causes damage.
So we open the fuel tap. Then we open the oil tap.
And then the old motorcycles had an oil pump that was driven by the engine. And then they also had a hand oil pump. And the hand oil pump was mostly intended for the girlfriend. So they knew when someone takes along a stubborn one. And some were a bit, I don't want to put my foot in it now, but there were also those. And then the manufacturers already knew we better build in an oil pump just to be safe. And if the girlfriend is a bit heavier, then he can pump in some extra oil, pump in additional oil. And then there's a nice blue mouse. And then the engine was doing well too. And after Woldenau, comes, smells like gasoline.
Much slowly so she inhales. And then he has to come. And then it starts. Well, and how do the legs sound? Harley and Petey in blue.